You're listening to Let's Talk Sustainable Business.
Hello, my name is Uwe Schulte, and it's a pleasure to welcome you to our podcast series, Let's Talk Sustainable Business. The series is brought to you by the Conference Board Global Sustainability Center. Today, I will be talking to Shamini Harrington, Vice President Climate Change at Sasol and Presidential Climate Change Commissioner for South Africa. So please let me introduce our guest for today. Shamini joined Sasol 16 years ago. She held several positions in the line of sustainability and environment. She holds a Master of Science in Climate Change from the KwaZulu-Natal University. Welcome, Shamini.
Thank you, Uwe. Great to be here.
Please tell us a bit about yourself and how sustainability has actually entered your life.
Sure, that's quite a long story, but it's strange how things work. You start doing a degree in a particular way, and life kind of draws you into something where you were meant to be. I started out doing medicine in the very early years, and did a filler in environmental science and sustainability, and just absolutely loved what we were trying to achieve and the impact that it was going to have on the world. And climate change, and particularly climate change and sustainability and food security and energy security, really became something that I held a whole lot of passion for, given the fact that this was an area that's very much needed in terms of South Africa and where we were going. So that's how I got into this area, and then worked for an organization called the Center for Scientific and Industrial Research, and really honed my skills on sustainability and climate change science, and got taken up into Sasol and absolutely loved this company, what it stands for, and the focus on safety, health, and environment at the time that morphed into a sustainability function that I've been part and parcel of growing in the company. So very much part of the sustainability journey for the company.
So that's interesting that you say you love the company. So you should tell us a little bit about Sasol, because I think quite a few of our listeners might have heard the name, but probably are not so aware what you guys are actually up to.
Okay. So Sasol is a integrated energy and chemicals company. We're about 70 years old. One of the companies in South Africa that is the largest contributor to the GDP in the country. Also a very large employment provider. We provide about close on 28,000 jobs in the country. We operate in about 22 different countries. So despite being a South African-born company, we're a global company operating across the world, in Europe, in the US, in the Middle East. And we do a very interesting process. We process coal and gas and run it through a process called Fischer-Tropsch, which is, funny enough, a German process. And it produces products like liquid fuels and various chemicals, and the same thinking and unique chemistry is then replicated throughout the world in various other regions. Of course, not using coal because that's most dominant in South Africa, really using gas and other feedstocks globally. In South Africa, we produce liquid fuels primarily from one of our facilities, our Secunda facility. It's a 160,000 barrel per day facility, very huge facility. It is also a large producer of CO2 and greenhouse gases because of the large amount of coal we use. We've got another facility in South Africa, a Sasolburg facility, where we produce a lot of chemicals. And in fact, many of our products are used as primary feedstocks into other chemical manufacturing downstream. So very much integrated into the fabric of the South African economy, but very much a global player in terms of the products we produce.
Yeah, I have to say that I've actually been to that plant in South Africa in my old life, which is
Really?
long time past. Um, the what you've, but by the way, I took a little bit of objection to say it's funny that Fischer-Tropsch is German. Me being a German chemist, of course,
Mm-hmm.
that's we were leading the field
Yes.
in those days, but enough of German pride, which is inappropriate anyway. So let's get back to the point. That means actually you are really a fossil fuel based company, and at the same time You are supporting the Paris Agreement uh, to
Correct.
to achieve the global net zero greenhouse gas economy. How do these two things go together, I wonder?
That's a very interesting question. And, if you spoke to us 10, 15 years ago, some of which we are talking about today, we didn't even think was possible. We're a large consumer of coal. South Africa has a lot of coal. But, the strange thing is, the same technology, Fisher Tropsch, can be utilized in a manner that produces sustainable fuels and chemicals very much needed in the low carbon future. So, our technology, the Fisher Tropsch technology and gasification, is agnostic to feedstock. So if you really change out the feedstock and supply this process with sustainable feedstocks like sustainable carbon, renewable energy, green hydrogen, you have a process that can decarbonize other sectors, hard to abate sectors in the economy, and actually still continue creating value into the future. So we ran through a very lengthy process. It took us about 5 years where we evaluated all the options around where the world was going. I mean, the climate challenge is real. We see it, we're experiencing it, and we're a large producer of greenhouse gases. We have to change that. We are very alive to that. And in our evaluation process, we came to realize that if we get the right feedstocks, we can actually contribute to our own decarbonization, meet the net zero requirements, and continue contributing to an economy like South Africa, who needs jobs, needs energy security, and needs continuous economic growth. And so these were the opportunities for us. Last year, we came out with our Future Sasol strategy, which really put forward a fossil fuel free vision and also put forward a view on a 30% reduction on greenhouse gases by 2030 and net zero emissions ambition by 2050. And we are aiming to reduce emissions on scope 1 and 2. And then for net zero, we're also looking to have part of our scope 3 emissions, our category 11, also be net zero. So it's a very, very ambitious ask. But given where we are at and the opportunity with our technology, this really represents a huge pivot and transition for the South African economy and for Sasol.
I have to dive a little bit into this. We have a very knowledgeable audience in terms of sustainability, but you know, net zero scope 1 and 2 is the stuff that's within your own boundaries of your own physical facilities. Scope 3 is, of course, from your suppliers and by the use of your products. And you said category 11. Please explain what you mean.
Explained. So, category 11 is exactly the category that you spoke about. It's the category that relates to consumers purchasing our products and combusting it. Now, scope 3 emissions, there's 15 categories that are defined, and we are specifically honing in on the largest, most significant category for our profile, and that is related to our consumers buying our liquid fuel products. And those products are, petrol, diesel, paraffin, all of those, fuel gas, gas, coal. So we want to be able, through this process, demonstrate and through our strategy, our commitment for sustainability by actually saying, given our process, Fisher Tropsch, we want to produce different products for the consumer. We want to produce products that don't have emissions but are compatible with a low carbon future. Sustainable aviation fuels. It's needed to decarbonize the transport sector, aviation sector. We are looking at fuel cell batteries. We are looking at sustainable chemicals, green methanol, green ammonia. All of these very much possible if you have the right feedstock, you have green hydrogen, and you can push it through a Fisher Tropsch process. And this is what we are looking to unlock. So category 3, scope 3 and category 11 demonstrates our commitment and our belief in the ability of this process to transform our product slate.
I admire this ambition, I must say, but you know, we recently had another company and talked about their ambition and the uncertainties that are in the plan. Of course, they have to be, because some of these technologies have worked on small scale, but they need to be scaled up and all of that. How do you actually deal with these uncertainties? Because this is very important for many of our listeners, because they're facing the same challenge. And I think what we should be looking for is having ambitious plans, but also pointing out to the public what the uncertainties are, so that this is not something that is just an ambition, but it is something real, and the uncertainties are being addressed.
So that's an excellent question. And you know, this is a challenge, like you said, all industry is facing. We have a significant percentage of the technologies required to achieve net zero not being mature today. And so, you know, you sit with, we have to get to net zero. The climate science is very, very clear on that. We have to get to net zero. We have to be able to limit temperatures to well below 2 degrees, you know, and pushing for efforts to 1.5 and more 1.5, given what the implications are at 2 degrees. So we sat back and we said, okay, so we can sit here and we can just wait for the technology landscape to change, or we can be an active contributor to unlock the space. And this is what we are doing. So, what we need in this space is to firstly understand what are the challenges to transition. Electrolyzer costs to be able to split water with renewable energy to get green hydrogen. So, how do we play in the space of looking at bringing down those costs? How we need renewable energy at scale in a country that it is very difficult to get renewable energy going right now. We're facing an energy security issue right now. There's a reliability issue. We are going through load shedding in the country. There's an opportunity here. How do we play in the space of activating the market by actually saying we need a demand? We want renewable energy of 600 megawatts. That stimulates the market, causes this catalytic reaction where then IPPs, independent power producers, come to the market to supply that. That then has the effect of stimulating the market, getting the renewable players to start playing in this space, and then regulatory approvals unlocked. We've been doing these things actively. We've also looking at proof of concept projects. We're saying we need to repurpose our facilities. We've got electrolyzers that can be repurposed already. We're doing that. We've got our first project to produce green hydrogen, 3.5 tons per day by end of 2023. So we're not saying we've got this all bedded down and we know exactly what we're going to do, but we've got to start somewhere. We've got to start in the value chain, stimulating the ecosystem, putting proof of concept projects down, crowding in capital, getting more investment, getting an ecosystem of partners going. That's so critically important. I'm sure you've heard a number of industry players saying to you how important it is to have partners. We don't have all the answers, but someone has an answer to some of the problems we're facing. How do we put this together and unlock a value chain, a supply chain, a momentum that affects change in the country? And that's what we're starting with. So we're doing all of those partnerships. SDG 17, critically important, but how do you see it in practice? So we want to see that happen. We've signed up a number of partners. We've got proof of concept projects. We're rolling out renewable energy to make this happen. And we're playing in the space of policy advocacy, incentives as well. You need this to stimulate new sectors, something as expensive as green hydrogen. I do want to spend a minute on this. The EU has been really a front runner. They put out the Fit for 55 policy package. In it has opportunities to unlock these very expensive technology options today, and that's the challenge. You need policy to stimulate this so you can get business to play a role. Recently, we saw the US government coming out with the Inflation Reduction Act. Within it has a number of incentives that are pushing business to adopt low carbon alternative energy sources and mechanisms, and to play in the space of saying, here, we will help incentivize very expensive technologies, but which are needed in a low carbon future. And we are looking to actually then play in these markets, look at affordability. South Africa doesn't have it. Let's play in the spaces that do, and then stimulate the markets here and local demand. So that's how we are playing a role. There are risks. There's a number of risks in this space, regulatory approvals, it's uncertain. The grid in South Africa, how do we get that balanced and how do we get it strengthened? But again, these are not challenges we are only facing as a country. These are challenges that are being faced globally. Look at what's happening in the EU right now. Energy prices, gas prices. How do we look at how we change these mechanisms? We need to start somewhere. That's the most important thing.
No, I think our listeners recognize what you're saying, which is in essence two very important things, as far as I get it. One is that as a sustainability leader, you have to put notice out there in the market that others are safe to invest because you will uptake things that are required. So, and the second one is it's actually three things. The second one is you can't do this alone. You have to build partnerships. Uh, Again and again, this has been mentioned in this podcast. And the third one, I think, a very important point you just made, policymakers have to create conditions which enable businesses to go ahead and do the right thing. So, absolute agreed, and thank you for pointing out how you are doing it. Now, I've read a little bit in your sustainability report, and you're looking at different scenarios, as we all do. Your pessimistic one says that we're going to overshoot 1.5. It might not actually be the pessimistic, but the realistic one, unfortunately. Um, so, and you are having an ambition to not overshoot. Yeah, so that's great. Um, but you also prepare for a possible future where we're reaching 2 to 3 degrees. What are you doing?
So that's just our scenario process aware. So what we are trying to do is actually be realistic and say across all of the scenarios we want to be robust. That's the important thing. You want to be able to plot all of it down and identify the no regret opportunities. It doesn't matter whichever scenario is playing out. Ultimately, we need to still do things to change where we are today. And some of the no regret opportunities that we have found from the scenarios that we've plotted is renewables, is a no-brainer. It must be done. It lays the foundation for all the other opportunities that we need to unlock in the space. Batteries, I spoke about green hydrogen, green steel. We're always going to need steel, but we need it to be greener than the process we have today. And these are the things that come with renewable energy. And this is what we are trying to identify. What we've done further is we've taken that and we've plotted scenarios related to our reduction to get to net zero. What are the levers that we can pull, and what are the signposts that we need to monitor to pivot when something becomes viable? And we've built into our roadmaps and our decarbonization flexibility. You don't want to lock yourself in and then suddenly you're locked into gas, but gas is not sustainable into the future and green hydrogen becomes cheaper quicker than you thought. You want to be able to have flexibility. To give you an example, what Sasol did. I told you about coal. We have coal in country. We have very little gas, but we see gas as a transition fuel in the interim to be able to watch and see the market and see what happens around green hydrogen. So we don't want to now be spending large amounts of money on pipeline infrastructure when we know we might not need that into the future because green hydrogen costs are likely to come down. So we're looking at LNG, but we're looking at responsible procurement of LNG with the lowest CO2 sources, and we're only looking at an incremental amount so that we don't lock ourselves into stranded assets into the future, etc. So that's the kind of thinking. We need to be able to put all the information down and choose the pathway with the least resistance that gives you maximum flexibility to be able to pivot, and you need to know what you are monitoring in the market. And that's what the scenarios have given us, a mechanism against which to do this. As a big company, you don't want to shock the company. You've got people that you employ, you've got shareholders to answer to, you've got stakeholders, communities, etc., that depend on you. But at the same time, you don't want to shock the economies where you operate in. So this is why we do what we do, and we're doing it in a very measured and orderly way, and we're monitoring all of the right variables so that we can make the right decisions at the right time.
I get that. I might be too much of a chemist now, so
Mm-hmm.
I'm worried to ask the question. I'll ask it anyway. So
Okay.
I get it. I get it that you say we need renewable energy, and it's probably a lot of solar for where you are, um, but there will be some wind as well, um, and that will then drive the electrolysis of water so that you can create hydrogen. Get it?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, you are using Fischer Tropsch at the moment using coal. So you
Correct.
take carbon and you make out of the carbon a carbon chain. Now you want to create a carbon chain where you don't dig coal out of the ground. So where's your carbon coming from?
So we have a lot of CO2 ourselves, and we don't want to lock ourselves into fossil fuels right now. So we want to be able to recycle, but we know that that's got some time frames on it. We can't use a fossil fuel carbon source for too long, but we can certainly use it in the interim. I mean, the EU Fit for 55 clearly recognizes this up to 2035, and potentially in a developing country, there might be opportunity to use it for longer. We're also looking at other industrial carbon streams. For example, I mentioned iron and steel. They are not going to be able to decarbonize quick and fast, given green hydrogen is the mechanism against which to do that. That's a hard to abate sector. But they have CO2, they have carbon. We can utilize that and cannibalize that within our process and still have a benefit to the overall inventory for the country. We can do the same for cement. We can do the same for the electricity sector. These are opportunities. And of course, the other one is biomass or biogenic sources of carbon. We're looking at that. And into the future, there's obviously, the CCUS type opportunity. Direct air capture is an opportunity for us to be able to do that. But there's obviously challenges. That's a technology that is really far out into the future. The likelihood of it really being utilized to the maximum is not fully understood right now. But all of these other options are being utilized and trying to be, sort of cultivated and nurtured in order to be able to do that in our process.
Let me repeat what I heard you say. So basically, for your process to work, you need CO2. And at the moment, what you would do is all that CO2 which is released into the atmosphere at the moment, still coming from fossil sources, you would reutilize it and therefore give it a second lifespan. And actually, you could then reutilize that again. So that is already a huge benefit, because per production unit or per calorie provided in warmth, you produce a lot of less CO2. But that's not for the long run. You need sources of CO2 then, like bio-based CO2 sources that can help you still running the process, rather than it coming directly from coal. That I understood. Now, that makes the next point very interesting. And unfortunately, we haven't got enough time now to go into depth, but we'll do this in the next episode. But let's just touch on it. Your business in South Africa, for example, but not only there, um, depends on coal mining and then the production around it. And I've seen the formidable and the huge facilities you've got with many people's employed. Um, and how do we do the change that's required without worsening human rights and increasing already existing inequalities? It's called just transition. Can you say what the concept entails, and we'll then go in more detail the next time.
Yes, no problem. I think that's such a critically important issue. It's surfacing now within the negotiations. It is part of the Paris Agreement. And what that means in South Africa's case or Sasol's case is that we cannot exacerbate the issues that are currently faced in the country through the transition and decarbonization that we are undergoing. We've got to make sure that whatever we do it in a measured and an orderly way, that as we transitioning and moving out of the facilities we know today, we are cultivating and growing sectors where people that are impacted, communities that are impacted, can be redeployed, reskilled, upskilled into these new areas of work. The economy is struggling. We have the highest levels of poverty at the moment, unemployment. We are the highest on the Gini coefficient, one of the highest on the Gini coefficient, demonstrating the unequalness of our society. So it's an absolute imperative that whatever we do, we need to do it in a careful way. So to give you another example of what we're doing, our 30% reduction on our greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 on scope 1 and 2, we are looking to pull levers that do not have an impact on the social dimensions that I was speaking about. So we are looking at a cutback on 25% of coal, and we are looking to keep the job implications, at the lowest levels possible. And in fact, we don't have an impact in that period. I mean, many stakeholders have said to us, why don't we move quicker and faster with reducing our emissions? But if we do, we're going to have those impacts. And coming out of a COVID environment, it's critically important that we do this in a way that creates opportunities and harnesses opportunities rather than exacerbating the risks and the challenges we face in the country. So that is what we are doing. We are bringing in a small amount of gas without impacting. But post 2030, we will see implications as we reduce our coal consumption more heavily. But at the same time, we've got these proof of concept projects. We've got the ones repurposing our current assets to start using green hydrogen, produce green ammonia, green methanol. We've also got greenfield projects up in the Northern Cape. We've got opportunities around renewable energy I was speaking about. What does that mean for manufacturing hubs, etc.? And we're playing in the space, trying to understand as the fossil fuel sectors get pulled back, that you're actually growing sectors, low carbon sectors, more sustainable sectors that create jobs and socioeconomic development for the country. And that's what we're trying to do. So you need to make sure that there's a balance, there's order, and that we are actually not causing further issues to how we transition.
That is a formidable approach that has a number of challenges built in, of course, and uncertainties as well. And I think we will explore this a little bit more when we go to the next episode. Let me just before we do so, just what are the main aspects of just transition? I get it that you're talking about employment. Are there others? And maybe we look beyond just Africa, because this is an issue that arises everywhere, doesn't it?
Correct. And it would be specific to the national circumstances within which the countries are transitioning. Germany is going through the same thing. Many of the states, in the US are also going through the same thing. You've got to make sure that the supply chains, that the communities that are dependent on fossil fuel activities that are no longer going to actually take place as you transition, have other sustainable forms of livelihoods, that the economies can thrive. I mean, if you look at what is going on in the Middle East, economies are built on the oil industry. What does that mean in terms of how you deal with that transition as the world moves away from oil? So it's beyond just one particular area, but it really has different implications, and some can be more pronounced than others, particularly if you don't have the resources or the capacity or the technology to actually deal with the change and the pace of the change. So those are real determinants for how it's going to vary within the countries where you operate or the regions where you operate.
Yeah, I get that. And when you think about a country like Nigeria, that's going to be as much as a challenge as it's for South Africa, even so it's oil rather than coal. Now we'll dive into that a little bit more. Thank you so much for sharing your ambitions around net zero and the pathway, and the openness about the uncertainties. That's very much appreciated. Thank you for that. And for our listeners, if you've enjoyed this episode, please remember to subscribe to our podcast series or explore the entire catalog of podcast programming from the Conference Board by visiting our website at tcb.org/podcasts. Thank you for listening, and please join us again when we continue our conversation with Shamini. For today, goodbye.
That was Let's Talk Sustainable Business.